Here I'm going to go over the different triangle congruence theorems. Now these theorems are used in proofs in order to eventually prove that two triangles are congruent. So you go through the steps of the proof and show that these two sides are congruent or these two angles are congruent, and then ultimately get to the point to be able to use one of these theorems to come to that conclusion that the triangles are congruent. So the first four theorems I'm going to go over. You notice they all have S's and A's in them. The S stands for side, the A stands for angle. There's a different number of S's and A's in each of them. They're in a different order, and that matters. So first I'm going to show you the side, side, side triangle theorem and what that would look like. If you go through the steps of your proof and you're able to show that these two sides are congruent, these two sides are congruent, and these two sides are congruent. And you can show that visually using these tick marks. If you are shown a picture of two triangles and they are marked like this, you can then also come to that conclusion that these two triangles must be congruent because of the side, side, side triangle theorem. The next one, there are two angles that are congruent and then a side that is congruent. And notice that the side is tucked in between the two angles. So if I'm able to show that these two angles are congruent and these two angles are congruent, the side has to be in between those two angles. So to show that the two triangles are congruent because of the angle side angle theorem, you would have to show that this side in between those two angles is congruent. Now, the next one, angle, angle, side, notice the two angles are congruent, but the side that is congruent is not in between the two angles. So, angle, angle, side would be something like this, or it could be this other side. It just can't be the side that is in between the two angles. So, this is an example of angle, angle, side. And then lastly, side, angle, side. Notice that that angle is tucked in between the two sides. So if I'm able to show that these two sides are congruent and these two sides are congruent, side, angle, side theorem would be used if I'm able to show that this angle here is congruent on each of the triangles. See, side, angle, side. Now, if you have right triangles, you only have to show two things are congruent because they're already giving you that these angles are congruent, that these angles are 90-degree angles. So if they show you a picture like this, you can use one of these theorems. We see that it has A, we know A means angle, but there's also H and L. So to refresh your memory about H and L, H stands for hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is directly across from the right angle. And then the L stands for leg. The legs are the two sides that create that form that 90-degree angle. So hypotenuse and leg. So the first theorem, HL, stands for hypotenuse leg theorem. So if you're given two pictures that have right angles, then you know that if you can prove that the hypotenuse is congruent on both of those triangles, and then one of the legs, then you can conclude that these two triangles are congruent because of the hypotenuse leg theorem. If instead we show that the hypotenuse is congruent on both of the triangles, and then also one of the other angles besides our right angle, then we can conclude that these two triangles are congruent because of the hypotenuse angle theorem. And then the last one is leg, leg. So you have your right angle, and then remember the legs are the two sides that form that right angle. So if I show that these two sides are congruent and these two sides are congruent, that's saying that both of the sets of legs are congruent. So we can conclude that these two triangles are congruent because of the leg-leg theorem. Now the last thing I want to show you is, you'll notice on my pictures I've shown you so far, the triangles are pointing in the same direction. You can already kind of tell that they are congruent. You're kind of suspicious that they're probably congruent, but sometimes you're given pictures like this where they're connected. You can kind of separate those two triangles in your mind and draw them again and put the tick marks in the right place. Or you can just try to visualize in the position that they are. There's this triangle here and this triangle here. If they have the tick marks, it makes it a lot easier. Notice this side is congruent to this side. These sides are congruent. And then this is the same side in both of the triangles. So it's obviously the same length for both of them. So notice the sides, all three sides are congruent. So this is showing that these two triangles are congruent because of the side, side, side triangle theorem. The one on the left is a little different. They're just showing us two things. They're showing us these sides are congruent and these sides are congruent. Nothing else. So for this one, we have to remember vertical angles. Remember vertical angles? Those are angles that are formed by the same two lines, and they're diagonal from each other. These here are vertical angles. Vertical angles are always congruent. So kind of put those tick marks there for yourself and then take a look. I have two sides and an angle, and that angle is tucked in between the two sides. So this would be side, angle, side.